I'm catching up on the snowfall reports here this morning from the nor'easter move through Sunday, and then Monday we saw effects continue yesterday, those blizzard-like conditions up through New England. And man, these are staggering. This one's going to go down in the record books likely for portions of Massachusetts, portions of Rhode Island. Just the duration of the blizzard-like conditions and then just the heavy snowfall. You can see that here. This is from the National Weather Service, all the latest snowfall observations. I'm going to start now like toward the southwest of this image. We're kind of down near like Washington, D.C., DMV metro area. Amounts kind of in that like 2 to 4 inch range. But as you start to track northeast up near Philly, getting close to 8 to 14 inches kind of in this corridor here, that would be notable on its own, even if, we didn't get 2 feet of snow in New York, but we did. You go up toward Manhattan, you get into kind of the area there, the boroughs, some of the suburbs, you're looking anywhere from like 22 to 28 inches of snow, firmly in that like 2-foot range. That extends all the way across Long Island, like over toward the Hamptons, all the way through the eastern part of that island there. Often when these nor'easters come up, there's a much like sharper snow line or gradient somewhere here along the coastline, and we don't really see that line. We had heavy snowfall almost all the way down to the coastline here, stretching from New Jersey up near 9 inches there, even further south across Delaware, got up near like 20 inches, and then tracking northeast through Connecticut, you're looking at a foot of snow plus. And then you get into Rhode Island, and that's where some of these amounts are staggering. I'll see if I can zoom this in here. And you're looking at like 36 inches, again, kind of near Newport, Rhode Island. I was there this year. There's been a recent report, it's not on here, of near 40 inches of snow near Fall River, Massachusetts. Finally, you do find that coastal gradient, but you got to go all the way over here toward like Cape Cod, and it's just right at the edge here, even Nantucket, getting 4 inches of snowfall. So this was this was the big one, and we were kind of watching and waiting this year. So many of these lows stayed off coast, and we thought, at least I thought, I won't throw Eric under the bus, but Thursday when I mentioned this, that low looked like it was going to stay offshore, and credit to the GFS, credit to the American Model Suite. It picked up on it the earliest on Friday, that track and trend back toward the northeast, and so it's kind of fun to see the GFS get a win over the ECMWF. Nice little coup there where the American model did better. We say it all the time, like even though it tends to perform worse, by metrics at the end of the year, it's not like you can discount it for any single event. There are plenty of events where the GFS gets a better handle on these kind of tracks before some of the other models do, and this was a great example of that. I'll zoom out a little bit. Boston, obviously up near that foot of snow, maybe a little bit more here as of the reports coming out this morning. Had some snow through West Virginia as well. Eric mentioned the snow that came through about 2 days ago through Iowa and in portions of Wisconsin. This was kind of neat to see the gradient here. Often the backside gradient on some of these Midwest storms is sharper than the flank on the southern end. You can see why, at least on the satellite, just that sharp gradient there. Kind of north of Ames, and then the much kind of looser gradient as that snow just kind of starts to filter in and get heavier as you go toward like Des Moines to the northeast there. But kind of neat to see that on satellite with the bare ground here, waiting across the Corn Belt for spring plant of 2026. Speaking of traffic, this was a much busier map yesterday morning, obviously with that heavy snow actively falling, the high winds ripping, some power outages as well. This map's starting to clear up a bit, but you can see Providence where you got to like that 2 to 3 foot. You start crossing that threshold. Some of this area, well, there are some like decent sized cities in here. In between them is pretty rural and ragged along the coastline here, a little bit rocky, and you can see some of the highways shut down, the interstates between some of these cities here with just very slow traffic moving, probably emergency crews out anywhere from like Boston, Wareham, all the way down to Newport. I mentioned that. Even getting up toward Boston, that drive there. This is a kind of busily trafficked area anyway. In the morning, it's almost like getting close to 7:30, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And you add all that snow, and this is going to be a problem until it melts. It's going to be hard to move that much snow and that heavy a snowfall. You can see the bridges here shut down across Narragansett Bay. This is, again, this one's going to be in the memory bank for a long time, I think, for the Northeast. And it's just fitting that right at the end of the year after so many of these missed, that we got the big one here this winter. Taking a step back here this morning, looking at the last 24 hours of precip. We mentioned yesterday the flood watches that were out for portions of Oregon, Northern California. More rainfall there, some snow getting up into the southern Cascades. Some of that is needed, but maybe not all of this rainfall here as we get into early March. They've just had plenty of it in that corridor. Would like to see, and we've been tracking this story more, that snowfall getting into the Intermountain West. Obviously, that low exiting out to the northeast, finally, up near Canada, and then the Atlantic yesterday as we kind of went through the evening hour and those conditions began to improve across New England. Otherwise, pretty clear across the continental U.S. Dry in some of these areas that we've been worrying about, like the southern plains and the southeast, although that appears to be changing, at least as far as the southern plains is concerned. We'll talk about that in the forecast in just a second here. But if I look at the owl hazards map, this is valid as of this morning, about 6:30 Central Time. You can kind of start to see the overall pattern taking shape a little bit here. You have the jet coming in very quickly like this. Flood watches out for Northwest California, Klamath Mountains, Southwest Oregon. You have the high wind warnings on the front range right underneath that jet. And then you have that jet cutting back down, those winter weather advisories in this quarter here. This has been familiar, those lows tracking out of Alberta across the upper Midwest into the eastern Corn Belt. Eric just touched on that yesterday, that potential again for snow showers through the eastern Corn Belt. That pushes these cold fronts down. We have cold air this morning lingering in Florida and the southeast, near freezing temperatures there. And then red flag warnings underneath that ridge that's been created by the jet tracking through that way. And so we have this drought pressure, this early season fire and drought risk there in the southern plains. Now, if you watched Eric's video yesterday, if you've looked at some of the long-range forecasts, this is going over, we think, wetter. We got to talk about why that is and where that might be going in March here. If we look at the mosaic of radar here across the continental U.S. this morning, those showers continuing to pound Northwest California against Southwest Oregon. Some of those getting into the Intermountain West here across the Snake River Valley near Boise, all the way up through the Willamette Valley into the Central Cascades, if you will, and then that jet running all the way across the northern tier of the country. And you can almost see it. You just track the movement of these rain showers, snow showers here this morning, and see the jet underneath it, that ridge, and that drought pressure here over the central U.S. Current temperatures here this morning, let me make this valid about 6 a.m. You can see Florida here, those freeze watches and warnings are out. 26, 28 near Jacksonville, 27 near Pensacola, getting down to that kind of hard freeze territory there, but it didn't track all the way down the Florida Panhandle. Like maybe there was some concern a little bit earlier yesterday, out of 37 degrees Fahrenheit there, and 44 in Miami, 37, I think that's Orlando. And you can see that freeze back into the southeast. Been a common theme here this winter with that jet stream out of the northwest bringing these bigger cold fronts into the southeast. I want to look at the jet stream here this morning. I kind of mentioned we could already see this in those rain showers pushing on shore, California, up near the Snake River, tracking across the upper Midwest. So some of those on radar, and then punching down, bringing that cold air back to Florida. You're going to put it all together there looking up at the jet stream. And that's an impressive flow, and you can kind of already tell that it was going to be impressive because if you looked at the current temperatures here this morning, look at Canada, the Shield, the Canadian Prairie, ice cold, stuck in winter still, even through portions of Ontario over toward Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, stuck in that cold air, starting to warm up to the south of that. And that's going to be that rip of that jet between the two, and then that dive back down where those temperatures get cooler across the eastern continental U.S. So you can kind of see it and put it all together there by finally looking up at the jet stream. It was kind of fun to do that. I try to put that story together every single morning. We've got high temperatures here today. It's from the National Weather Service. Again, underneath that jet, you have the warmth across the Texas Panhandle, the red flag warnings there across the southern plains as the winds tick up during the day today. Still cool in the eastern U.S. You can imagine all that dense snowpack across New England is going to promote cooler temperatures in the meantime, but warming up in the central U.S. That continues tomorrow. Got a cold front coming through and a trough. We'll talk about a little bit of precip associated with that, especially for the eastern Corn Belt. We saw those winter weather advisories kind of sprinkled through the upper Midwest into the eastern Corn Belt Wednesday, Thursday. That cold front heads back toward the east, but we're warming up behind it across the plains, across the southwest, through Arizona, southern Texas, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, potentially near Corpus Christi. Southeast finally warming up out of that kind of early freeze that we're seeing here this morning. And the temperature's just cranking up through the central plains into the Midwest now by Friday. And then looking at a potential cold front coming through this weekend. And another rainmaker, snowmaker potentially, for this quarter here, early next week, as that system kind of flips and turns this pattern around a little bit. We'll talk about that in just a second. Look at the minimum temperatures. Those overnight temperatures expected this morning were expected to be a little bit lower in the Panhandle, but looks like we got those forecasts pretty good for the southeast. I'm going to play this in through tomorrow, Wednesday. Cold lingers across the southeast and Florida, lingers across New England, but we're not down to that freezing territory tomorrow morning on Wednesday for the southeast. We are well below that over in the upper Midwest as that cold front comes through, the Clipper system sneaks through. That's those winter weather advisories that I talked about earlier. You're seeing temperatures warm up across the board, especially those overnight temperatures until that next cold front that we have coming through this weekend. The reason for that is that ridge right here, we're going to be watching it develop over the next few days. If you saw quickly there, we have this trough moving through the upper Midwest, prompting those showers, those winter weather advisories that we just looked at. That quickly swings through tonight. By Wednesday morning, moving through the eastern Corn Belt. Ridge staying here over the southwest, kind of near the Four Corners. Another piece coming through on Friday. Very weak. We'll have to keep an eye on that. And the precipitation forecast, we have another cold front associated with the shortwave trough. You can see we call it a shortwave because it's just this little trough kind of embedded in the flow, moving through the upper Midwest. By Friday, it's going to bring temperatures down. But now by Monday, it's going to be interesting to watch. That shortwave is going to bring some cold air in. We saw that here this weekend. But the flow is going to try to turn back around. We're going to now build ridging over the middle part of the country. That's going to allow warmth and moisture to return to this corridor here, all through this area. I think early next week we'll have to be watching, for a bigger weather maker cutting through this area here. It's still early, we're almost a week away, maybe 6 days away, but some sort of weather maker likely to come through. All right, let's see where the ECMWF puts that. Current forecast showers continue across the northwest, including portions of Montana, Idaho, in the upper elevations as the form of snow. As we go through Wednesday morning, that snowfall that was here over the upper Midwest here today on Tuesday is going to track across Michigan, the Great Lakes, into Ontario, and then the Northeast here by Wednesday morning. Again, when the weather advisory is out for some of those areas there. Another weak system coming through on Friday. That's that one I mentioned, really weak, but just bringing up some precipitation now in Tennessee, Kentucky. Maybe a little bit of snowfall here across Illinois, the I-70, I-74 corridor. Better rainfall as that skates through the southeast through Thursday evening, maybe even some convection thunder with that system as it moves through. Friday morning, that clears out, bringing some rainfall to Florida. They need that. We've seen those red flag warnings here this week. So potentially some nice precipitation coming through there near the end of this week. Now, by this time on the weekend, that cold air is starting to settle in. We can see this kind of clipper system taking shape across the plains. Not very strong, but it is there. We'll have to keep an eye on that in the models. But that cold air has settled in now. We have this high pressure system here. We're waiting to see if we can bring that flow back around. I mentioned that earlier with that ridge building in. Imagine we're going to bring some of this flow out of the Gulf, some sort of system potentially developing here. Near the end of the weekend, we see that here near the Ohio River, potentially snow coming back to that like I-70, I-74 corridor in north. Rainfall trying to build in. You don't see a big coherent low yet. It's just kind of bubbling and building. Some of that snow trying to get back into the mid-Atlantic where they've had so much. And then now finally, like Tuesday, you can see a proper low trying to develop here. But plenty of precipitation and snow chances through this corridor, I think early next week, and that might even move back into New England, obviously where they had so much recently. Now, I took this forecast all the way out until next Tuesday. We're past a week out now in this specific forecast here. I'm not going to call for this massive heavy snow event 7 to 8 days out, but there's that potential with this low trying to develop over multiple days early next week. And then by then you see the more long-range pattern. Eric mentioned this yesterday, looking wetter for the southern plains and the Four Corners region. I want to jump over and look at the GFS, how it evolves, that kind of slow, low development early next week. There's that eastern Corn Belt clipper system we talked about. There's that weaker one coming through on Thursday that tries to coalesce over the Tennessee Valley, kind of stalls for a day, and then Thursday and Friday we see those better precipitation rates here over the southeast near Atlanta. That kicks out of the area. Remember, we had that kind of weekend clipper-like system moving through really quickly. That's likely to just be a quick snow duster. That moves through, and then waiting early next week. There's that first attempt to develop that low, waiting for that flow to come around. Now we see a better attempt on Tuesday morning. More rain across the Midwest, and you see it switch over to snow, more so in the Mid-Atlantic and New England. But precipitation through that corridor, through the Ohio River Valley, early to the middle part of next week, before it finally switches over to that more southern plains up through the Midwest pattern we're looking like now, more so in that like early March 4th through March 10th. If you just compare these two 1-to-1 back and forth, I don't see a huge change. We see the Ohio River Valley system, obviously the nuance between where that snow line sets up a little bit further north on the GFS, but both going back over wet for the southern plains. In the long range, the GFS sharpens that line a little bit. Specifically, there is still this kind of drier concern, even through parts of East Texas, through parts of the southern Mississippi Valley. But this area of Texas specifically, where we've seen a lot of those red flag warnings, and then up through Oklahoma into Missouri. I mean, if you remember, those red flag warnings were posted all through this area last week, getting better chances for rain in the long range. Snowfall forecast, as you can imagine, the Mid-Atlantic and New England, at least from the ECMWF, looking more significant out into next week. I took this all the way out 10 days, so it's picking up that heavier snowfall event that I showed you that I wasn't willing to put too much confidence in yet, but there is that potential, fortunately, for people clearing out that heavy snow now for more snow next week. Potential for snow kind of skating through the Midwest. I mentioned some of those weekend systems trying to coalesce right through that like I-70, I-74 corridor early next week. We'll have to keep an eye on that potential here. Again, that rain snow line not guaranteed to be kind of right along that I-74, I-70 corridor right now. Could move north to south, and that snow swath is going to adjust with it. In the long range, if I back that North American pattern up into the ECMWF ensemble and I take it all the way out like March 5th, March 6th, this is kind of near the end of that week. Next week, we do see that better southwest flow coming across the southern plains. A nice subtle trough here, big ridge over the eastern U.S. This is that pattern that would pump moisture, right in through Texas, up through Oklahoma, Missouri, into Illinois, into the Midwest, probably keeping us drier in parts of the southeast underneath the ridge, but around it, especially on that kind of forward flank, plenty of moisture would be expected out of this kind of pattern. Again, March like 4th through the 10th. It's not a surprise then that if we go look at the long-range panel for precipitation anomalies, CPC, that corridor, ECMWF ensemble, that corridor, ECMWF AIFS, the operational run, significantly wetter, again, through like Arkansas, portions of Oklahoma, and the GFS ensemble, right on cue. Full agreement in the corridor of heaviest precipitation. But you do see portions of the southeast, drier, that corridor here. We also see California in the west taking a break from some of that heavier precipitation we saw. We saw some of these forecasts for March go a little bit drier for California earlier. We're trying to compare those with analogs. This will be interesting to watch. Eric kind of mentioned this, I think, at the end of the video yesterday, that if we stay wet here in March, that's probably a lot of lows coming through the Northeast Pacific, probably a lot of flow, and we'd be cooling off the water temperatures. I understand I'm drawing on a very small map on the thumbnail now, but it's kind of a give and take. Like if California in this area stays wet, I start to get a little bit worried for drought pressure later in the middle part of the country, because it means we're cooling off the waters here just by nature of a lot of these systems coming through. You can think of like 2011, huge water year for California and the West, but then some drought pressure later on. That ended up being a La Nina year that we had to watch that more significantly. 2012 kind of overshadowed it, but 11, another drought year in the record. Speaking of that kind of MJO, jet stream activity out of the Pacific, we haven't been talking about the MJO for a while. We've kind of been stuck over here in phases 2 and 3, and finally getting some activity in the forecast. In fact, this big push around from the ECMWF extended model here, taking us kind of over to the 6, 7, 8 territory. As we get further into March, this kind of puts us back in that more interesting regime. We kind of mentioned that sometimes these like 2, 3, 4, 5 are the kind of warmer, sometimes more less inclement patterns, but then you get these transitions, 6, 8, 1, 2. You get some interesting things happen when you have these transitions coming around, at least out into the Pacific. So watching that carefully. If we do get back toward phase 7, that's kind of where we were. You can track back in black. These are the kind of past dates. You can track all the way back to like mid to late January. We were back in phase 7, and that's right when we had that westerly wind burst, mid to late January, where we had these westerly winds in red. This from the ECMWF AIFS ensemble, looking at the trade winds here across the Pacific. And the westerly wind burst is what can help kick off these big kind of El Nino-like surges in the Pacific, warm up those ocean temperatures even more. As fast as they've been warming up, this could warm them up even more out into the forecast. And so when I look out into the forecast, which is of course down on these kind of crazy Hobmiller diagrams, I see those westerly wind bursts coming back, as we get into March, pushing all the way out into the far western Pacific here, kind of east of Indonesia. That geography is where I'm looking, and then trying to push further. Despite this, trade wind surge that we've seen in the Central Pacific, Eric kind of talked about how this hasn't cooled off the waters much. We just don't have a lot of cold water left in the Pacific. And despite that, now we might be flipping over into a pattern favorable for warming up the ocean temperatures in the Pacific even more. I'm running out of reasons to think we're not going to be an El Nino. To say that a different way, it looks like, by all accounts, we're pushing toward a significant El Nino. We've remarked And I've looked back at the data over the past 25, maybe even 30 years. It extends well into the record at this point. But this is one of the, I would say, fastest weakening La Niñas I've seen in spring. The Climate Prediction Center just released their latest report on INSO. This is pretty easy to look up. If you just look up CPC INSO, comes up as like one of the first or two hits. This PDF, this was just came out here yesterday on Monday, the INSO recent evolution. It's kind of fun. You can read through everything that they're kind of keeping track of with respect to those sea surface temperatures. But if you come down here and you look at the upper ocean heat content for the Pacific, this longitude right here, this is tracking through the past few months the upper ocean heat of the Pacific. And you can see going into La Nina in fall, that was cold. But since December, since the new year, look at how rapid. I mean, that is just a roller coaster straight up. December, January, now into February. Just not a lot of pausing and how quickly we've warmed up the Pacific. We can actually look at a cross section. So this down on this graphic is down into the ocean. So you're looking down like 100, 200 meters, and in this corridor across the Central Pacific, left to right is west to east. Look at all that subsurface warmth that's liable to upwell here if we get some of those westerly wind bursts. You can see this in all these different charts, how that subsurface warm has been building. I mean, this just everything is pointing at this point to potentially not only a clear weakening of La Nina out of the picture, but maybe a stronger El Nino. I mean, it's just the alarm bells are flashing right at this point. So that had me going back into the record, looking at past years with strong El Ninos. Those stand out very easily on a chart like this, looking at INSO since 1950, 23, 24. 15, 16, 97, 98 was kind of a big El Nino. In the 90s, 82, 83, and then 72, 73, all reaching what we would call that very strong El Nino territory. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get there, but all signs point to plenty of momentum for this El Nino here this spring to form. And if that continues into summer, you might be talking about a strong to very strong El Nino. Went back through all those years. I just picked out all those above that very strong demarcation there. And in spring, kind of curiously, drier for portion of the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic. Strangely, March through May, wetter in Texas, wetter for Florida. It's kind of interesting looking at the long-range forecast. I'm not necessarily connecting these two too significantly in the signal, but we were wetter in some of these for that southern plains in Texas getting out into March finally. Keeping an eye on that. Temperature-wise, cooler in some of these years. I found that somewhat interesting as well, not necessarily for the southeast in Florida, but by and large through much of the middle and eastern part of the country in those stronger El Nino years. Colder through spring, a little bit drier across the Midwest, even getting into the central plains. We've seen that on some of our La Nina to El Nino analogs. This is just those strongest El Ninos. We look out further out, June, August, decent precipitation across kind of a wide area of the central and eastern U.S., but some concern up here. Again, this is not a huge sample size. I'm not going to put too much weight into these strong El Nino analogs, but if El Nino continues to strengthen as expected, if we get into early March and those westerly wind bursts start cranking through the Pacific, we're very quickly going to be talking about a fading weak La Nina and a very quickly strengthening, weak to moderate El Nino, potentially, April or May. And this is going to come back into the conversation looking at some of these more significant developing El Nino years. So just shows some areas. Southern Mississippi Valley, obviously drier in the forecast here. We just mentioned that cutoff line kind of near Dallas where East Texas, Southern Mississippi Valley was staying on the drier side. And then the upper Midwest, where we've lacked snow in this area here. We got that swath through Iowa, Minnesota. We're getting some across the far upper Midwest. But just kind of keeping an eye on some of these areas if we continue to develop that El Nino narrative. Temperature-wise, again, June through August, I do have 1972 in here, so it's a much older year, 50 plus years ago. And that can sway these, but it's still a pretty decent cold signal, despite that across the Midwest and the East. There is one area that's come up again and again on a lot of these analogs. It's coming up in the forecast as well. If there's any area where I'm really worried about like heat, wildfires, and potential drought issues, it's kind of up in this corridor here. If we stay warmer along the Northeast Pacific and we get kind of an action that looks like this, and it's been kind of showing up in some of the analogs here, it's obviously in the stronger El Nino years where you have this northwest flow cratering through. Much cooler here, but your heat, your sunshine, your lack of precipitation ends up here over the Pacific Northwest, maybe British Columbia. So that's one area I'm kind of hyper-focused on this summer and have some more concern with, especially since those warm sea surface temperatures continuing to sit here off the coastline. I'm bringing up the sea surface temperatures. This is as of Sunday, and again, that cold patch in the Pacific, every day I bring this up, is smaller and smaller, and that warm tongue of subsurface heat is sitting just beneath it. just under this image, you have all that warmth ready to come up, and this current 2026 El Nino to rear its head and show its face. I think it's coming, and it's coming pretty soon. Looking at sea surface temperatures, again, from the strong El Nino years in May, I was kind of curious to find that they had this colder area of water here just off the coast of Alaska and the west coast. It's kind of an area we watch as a drought risk. Now, we didn't see a ton of huge drought pressure in these years, save for 2023 early and then regional drought and a few of these other ones, not anything too widespread. But that's staying over a little bit cooler. Again, 1972 might be skewing that. It's interesting to see there. But again, by May in these strong El Nino years, you had a clear El Nino signal stretching across the Pacific. We might be on our way to that in 2026. And does Climate Prediction Center, their outlook for June, July, August, here's it wetter over here, Tennessee Valley over toward the mid-Atlantic. Drier concern for the Northwest. Notice how the Southern Plains, the story's kind of been flipping around. And obviously saw early season. Here are the red flag warnings, the wildfires, even some of that blowing dust. We're always kind of concerned about that. Eric mentioned that yesterday. Climate Prediction Center not going one way or the other. Some of the analogs here have gone over, wetter for Texas this summer and maybe even spring. But one area, again, that I'm more confident in of that concern for this summer specifically would be the Northwest. So not a bad thing that they're getting some of this rainfall now and some snowfall in the current pattern. I think that's my last slide today. Eric's going to talk with you guys tomorrow. For today, on Tuesday, thanks for watching.